welcome to the show. It is day 3 of my meal plan week. Here's hoping you had a chance to get the grocery list off online and go shopping this past weekend so we can cook along all week. Today, we're heading to Italy and I am making my prosciutto and pea risotto. Honestly, I love a risotto. It's so, so good. A lot of people, I think it's really hard to make. You gotta stir the whole time. People will tell you it's laborious. I'm here to tell you that I think that's a lie. To be honest, I think you do not have to stir as much as everybody tells you, but you can tell your friends you did stir a lot because then they're gonna feel like you worked really hard on your dinner, which is always a good thing. All right, to get started on my risotto, I've got 2 tablespoons of olive oil in this pan, and I've sweated down 2 shallots. Now that's over about medium heat. That's been going for about, I'd say about 2 to 3 minutes. You just want them to be kind of translucent. I season those up with salt. I'm gonna add in a little bit of pepper. Now, anytime I'm using a shallot, or I have a recipe that calls for shallots, if you can find them, great. If you couldn't be bothered to either hunt them down or use them, honestly, you can swap them out for onions. Shallots are kind of like tiny little, slightly garlicky, softer onions. So if you did want to use onions in this, just use about like half or a quarter of a red or like a cooking onion, and that would be perfect. Now that's looking good, but to amp up the flavor a bit more, I'm gonna add in 2 cloves of garlic. Just gonna mince those straight on into the pan, and I got my handy dandy rasp, I love it so much. So essentially, you just want this in there. Anytime I'm adding garlic into pretty much anything, if it's also got onions or shallot or anything else in there, I like to cook down the onions first, because they actually take a little bit longer to cook. Shallots, really nice and delish. Garlic, if you cook them for too long, it's gonna burn, and burnt garlic is gross. That is not a flavor you want in anything. So just get those garlic cloves right on in. And just like with any time I'm adding garlic, I only want that to cook for about a minute. But while that starts to do its thing, I'm gonna add in a little bit more oil. If you wanted here, you could go butter. That's more Northern Italian though. I feel like we're gonna go olive oil here and stick kind of south. Give that a stir. And now I'm gonna add in the rice. Now for risotto, you don't wanna use classic like long grain rice. You don't wanna use brown rice. You wanna use something called arborio rice. And arborio rice is kind of shorter. It's a short grain rice. It's really nice and starchy, but basically what those short grains do is it lets out a lot of starch, giving you like a creamy, thick texture to this delicious risotto, but it doesn't like clump up. It's gonna be delicious and wonderful. It's kind of similar to sushi rice, but look for arborio rice or Italian rice and you'll be good to go. So I've got 2 cups of that here, and I'm gonna add that on into the pan. And I'm not gonna lie, folks. Yes, I wrote this recipe, so I'm gonna give you exact measurements, but when I'm making risotto at home, I never measure anything. I just do a little bit of oil or butter in a pan, pop some onions or shallot in there, a bit of garlic, and then I just sprinkle in enough rice to coat the bottom of the pan. That's gonna give you probably enough for like 4 servings, but I'm making extra risotto today, because you'll find out on Friday, because we're gonna use leftovers for something delish. Now, you wanna toast that rice for about a minute, 30 seconds to a minute, because what that's gonna do is it's gonna cook off some of that external starch, allow those rice grains to kind of stay individual once you start adding the liquid, but you're gonna get nice and creaminess. So it's not gonna be like rice pudding, it's gonna be risotto. So that is looking delish to me. So now I've got to start adding liquid. Unlike normal rice, where you add the rice into the pot with the water, bring it to a boil, and then let it simmer and steam away, risotto is actually stock fed. So you start adding stocks or liquids slowly, and it kind of slowly grows that rice and cooks it through. So the first thing we need to add to risotto, just like any good Italian would do, some wine. You gotta throw some wine in there. So I've got some dry white wine here. I'm just using a Pinot Grigio. This is what I call my house white. It's also known as Tuesday wine in my house. The stuff that you don't feel bad about opening on a Tuesday, it definitely has a screw cap, and there's nothing wrong with that. So I need about a cup of that right on into the pan, and it's gonna immediately sizzle up and simmer. Now, if I had more than a cup in there, what I like to do when I'm making risotto, pour myself a glass of wine. Every time it gets a little drink, I get a little drink. It's a good thing. All right, so you just wanna stir that just until, and simmer that until that wine is absorbed and evaporated. Once that's done, I would cook this for a little bit longer. You wanna start adding in your broth. So I've got about 5 to 7 cups of broth here. I'm using vegetable, you can also do chicken, but you wanna add it about a half a cup at a time. If you're not using warm broth, it's not the end of the world, it's gonna be fine, but warm broth just comes up to a simmer quicker, cooks your risotto quicker, which is always a good thing, especially on a weeknight. So I'm gonna let that wine start to reduce. I'm gonna start adding that broth, but while that does its thing, I'm gonna come over here. and I'm gonna start ignoring that risotto. This is where people will be like, no, Mary, you must stir it the whole time. I'm not gonna do it. I like breaking the rules. I break very few rules, and that is one of them. But while that does its thing, I'm gonna get to work on something kind of meaty for this. So I've got some prosciutto here, and I wanna crisp this up. Now, prosciutto is like a deli meat, so you don't actually have to cook it, but if you want to, for a little bit of extra texture, just lay it out onto a parchment-lined sheet pan, just in a single layer. And I wanna roast that in the oven. That's gonna give you these like crunchy little textural components, this little kind of prosciutto chip on top of your risotto. It's absolutely delish. So just lay those babies out. And then that needs to go into my 400-degree oven for just like 8 to 11 minutes until they're nice and crispy and golden. So while those do their thing, I'm gonna check on this risotto, give it a bit of a stir, toss in a little bit of that stock. So I have got that prosciutto that is beautifully crispy now. Basically, it just shrink, right? It's like fancy bacon, but it's not. And it's easier to make because it doesn't splatter everywhere. It's gonna give such a nice textural component. It's really meaty, and when you cook it down, it just gets more meaty and delicious. So that's gonna be delicious. It's kind of like meat chips, if that's what you're looking for in your life. Very good. But I'm gonna come back over here to my risotto. Now, this is looking really nice and creamy. So all of that rice has absorbed all that wine, all that stock, and in doing so, it also releases a little bit of starch. You know when you're cooking pasta, and they always tell you to save some of the cooking liquid? That's because there's a bit of starch in that liquid. But with risotto, there's so much of that delicious starch that you get this creaminess, which looks absolutely delish. So if you wanted to eat this as is, delish, what a delight, so good. But we're gonna add in a little bit of green. So I've got 3/4 of a cup of just frozen peas here. Anything you got in the freezer, toss it on in. If you had some like zucchini, chop that up, pop it in too, that would be delish. But I love those little bright pops of peas. Really, really nice and tasty. Give that a stir. And that heat from the risotto is gonna kind of cook those peas. I don't want them to be like, how do I say it? Like, you don't wanna cook these like you did in the 90s, where the peas are no longer green, they're turned brown, and that's not what you want. You want them to still be bright and delicious and wonderful. But now we need to add in my favorite ingredient, and that, my friends, is cheese. I love cheese so, so much. Now, if you want to, you could do Parmigiano Reggiano, that would be great, but I really, really like Pecorino. It's a little bit nuttier, or it's less nutty, it's actually more salty and got a little bit of a funk to it. It's really, really great. So I'm gonna toss that on in, give that a stir. But to be honest, if you're at the grocery store, I know on the grocery list I say Parmigiano Reggiano or Pecorino, but if all you can find is like Grana Padano and it's on sale, feel free to get that too. You just want some sort of hard Italian cheese. Now this is looking beautiful. That cheese is melting in, but right now this is a little thick. If I were to serve that up, this is more kind of like rice pudding texture. So what I wanna do right before serving is add another ladle or two of this broth. Just pop that on in, loosen it up a little bit. I saw this on, did anybody watch that Stanley Tucci show where he goes to Italy? And he just says, si, 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 si. And I'm like, I don't think you speak Italian, Stanley Tucci. He makes risotto with this guy, and they do the most beautiful thing. So I'm gonna try it here, but we're gonna see if it goes as well. Basically, when you're making risotto, you're looking for it to kind of have the consistency when you kind of slop it around in the pan of like a big wave. So get that broth in there. All those grains are looking beautiful. Nothing's breaking up. Give it one other stir, kind of a little bit of that. So essentially, okay, here we go. Let's see if this works. You're gonna take your pan and you're gonna kind of like, that's pretty good. This wave, do you see, it looks weird, but that's essentially what you're looking for. Because whenever you're doing something that is really starchy, you want it a little looser in the pan than you want it on the plate. Because once you serve that up, that is gonna tighten up as soon as it gets a little cold. So I'm gonna bring this on over. It's looking beautiful. Pop this onto a plate. You could also do this on a bowl, whatever you want. To be honest, bowl food is one of my favorites. But just spoon that out. It smells so good. And honestly, as is, what a delight. But you can take those little prosciutto chips and just crunch them over top. That was a good one, guys. Maybe a little bit of extra cheese on there. For a little bit of extra green, we've got some chives. You could throw some basil on there. Whatever you're looking for, it would be absolutely delish. To be honest, though, my favorite thing about making any sort of pasta in a pan like this is offering to clean up and this is how I clean up. You just eat it straight out of that pan. Oh my gosh. It's like stew, but risotto, and so good, and there's cheese and peas. You gotta make this is amazing. But when you're cleaning up, be sure to save about 1.5 cups of this risotto because we're gonna use it on Friday to make my favorite crispy little treats. But tomorrow is day 4 of our meal plan week, and it is steak night. To access the grocery list, just scan the QR code on your screen or check out our Instagram page or thegoodstuff.ca so you can join in on dinner this week. Hey, Mary here. What did you think? Drop your comments below and don't forget to like and subscribe for more of The Good Stuff.